Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Inclusiverse podcast. I'm one of your hosts. My name is Kally and I'm joined by another one of our incredible hosts, Nic Hamilton.
Hi there.
How are you?
I'm not bad, thank you. Yourself?
Good. I'm very well, thank you. Last episode was very insightful. It was, you're an incredible individual, Nic. You shared with us a lot about your story, kind of growing up with CP and all of the struggles that you've had and how, that's made you who you are today and being in motorsport and being a real kind of role model for people.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Yeah, and today's episode is kind of dedicated to different kinds of disabilities, and we have two incredible guests that we'd like them to introduce themselves. So I'm going to pass over to the gentleman I'm staring at right now.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so I'm Scott Saunders, and my youngest lad is disabled. He has hearing loss.
Fantastic. Thank you for joining us, Scott.
Thank you.
And I'm joined by another guest.
Hello, my name's Simon Myers, and my parents are both profoundly deaf. So similar to Scott, but slightly other end of the spectrum.
Yeah, it's almost kind of like parallel, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So with these kind of inwords, Nic, that we spoke about in the introduction episode, we're going to be looking about inclusive, individual, and insightful. So those are the things that we want to kind of share. We want you guys to share your personal experiences and have a round table open discussion about disabilities, how that affects you in work as well, and kind of what you've had to deal with, you, Simon, growing up with deaf parents, and then you, Scott, having a deaf child. We want to inform our listeners on how everyone can be more inclusive of disabilities, right? Not every disability can be seen. Mm-hmm. And I think this episode is going to be really helpful in us understanding more about each other and how we can be better colleagues at BPG and how we can be better to other people.
Amazing. So to start off with, which one of you guys would like to talk a bit about yourselves and your experiences?
Yeah,
start with you, Scott.
I'll start.
Sure.
Yeah, so my youngest boy, Chester, he's nearly 6, and we found out when he was about a week old and his first hearing screening that he has as a child that he might have some hearing loss. So we had to go through the steps of getting him tested for it. He's obviously a baby, so you couldn't have it done via the conventional methods, which is, clicking a button. We couldn't do that. So he had to actually be sedated, then check his brain activity to sounds. Mm-hmm. And we found out that he has sensory neuro loss, bilateral, so it's both ears. Basically meaning if his scale of, say, 1 to 10, 1 being perfect hearing, 10 being can't hear a thing, he's around the 8 to 9 mark. So he's had hearing aids since being 4 months old.
And how did that impact you and your partner at the time? Obviously, getting that news, how did that affect you? Was it?
It was different for me, I suppose, to my wife. My sister is also deaf, so it turns out it's a genetic thing. Very rare between us, but yeah, it's a genetic thing. So my sister has it, we don't have it, but my son has it, and I've got 4 kids, so the 1 out of the 4 to have it is very, the rare genetics to go across. So for me, it wasn't a big deal. I've grown up with that, having a sister for it. My wife, to be fair, took it really well because she's known my sister. We've been together now 15 years, so she's almost grown up with my sister going through it as well. So for her, it was no different either. I think for us, it was just more like we saw it. We actually chatted about this last week, and we saw it in very different perspectives. For her, it was what can she do to support him. For me, I was going through all the negative issues that he might come across in his life that I can't be there to help him with. Mm-hmm. So from a protective point of view, that's kind of how it hit me. Just knowing that there's always going to be parts where I can support him, but there's always going to be parts that he's going to find difficult that I actually can't have any sway over, just down to his disability. And that's, I think, from a dad's point of view, that kind of sucks.
And what sort of topics are we thinking in terms of things that you can't help?
We heard some. It's going to sound horrible. We heard some horror stories from a group called FIG, which is a preschool for hearing impaired children. So they kind of get together as a group and learn about hearing loss with each other and learn a little bit of sign and how to communicate. And one of the mums came in one day saying that the kids in the school where her son went to took his hearing aids out and stamped them on the floor so he couldn't hear. So that sort of thing, not being there to be able to stop that, is something that straight away in my head thinks, well, how is that going to work? Things even as silly as going swimming. How do we communicate with him? If he's swimming, he's got to take his hearing aids out, he can't hear. When it's night time, the lights are off, he can't hear, he can't see. How does that feel for him? So it's different ways for us to adapt into making his life easier, right?
And how have you adapted your life since, having a deaf son? So you said you've got 4 kids.
Yeah.
So you're so used to having kids that are able-bodied and then having Chester, how did you have to adapt your life?
We had to adapt just in the way that we think about stuff. Like you've got kids, you think you've got kids yourself, right? So like everything that you do, you think I've got to put that away so they don't hurt themselves or don't swallow it.
Yeah.
This is different because it's hearing aids. So you're in a car and he's in the car with you in the car seat and he needs to hear what's going on. But then he could take his hearing aids out and swallow a battery while you're driving. So you have to start thinking about that in your head. And then if he goes out to play, even the other day, he was on the trampoline, he came back in with only one hearing aid in. One had fell out while he was playing and we didn't know where it had gone. So we had to then go outside to try and find it. And if it's wet and it's raining outside, if he hasn't got a hood up and his hearing aids get wet, that could be something that we have to wait for 24 hours to dry out in a dry box. And if we can't do that, then how's he going to hear? Silly things like finding out the other day that his hearing molded split. So I had to find a way to glue it and fix it, to then get an emergency appointment to go and get some new molds made, which then take another week. So it's just almost like preparation, right? Everything that you do, you have to prepare for just to make sure that he's not affected. We're very lucky with the two older boys. They look after him. They do everything for him. They will put his hearing aids in for him in the morning and they will support him if his batteries are running low and stuff. So it's almost... From my wife's point of view, she's now gone from being a dental nurse to now being a junior audiologist. So she's learning all about hearing loss and how to help other people. So for her, she's kind of taken that as a career path because that's what she's passionate about.
That's amazing. So your wife has even gone to the next step of like, how do I understand my son even more? And how can I be better by actually taking that as a career, which I'm going to assume probably would have never have happened if... Chester hadn't been there?
No, she enjoyed doing what she was doing as a dental nurse. She enjoys helping people. The difference is with hearing loss is, like I say, even in my sister's case, for instance, she's had NHS hearing aids since she was a kid. She didn't like the mould process. She didn't like going back to NHS, so she's not had any done for absolutely ages. Now, because of what my wife does, she's actually gone in and had a hearing test with her and got some brand new hearing aids that she's not changed for 20 years. So for her, she's gone from normal hearing aids with the little tubes and it's all like mono to having digital stereo hearing aids for her for the first time ever in her life, and she's 27.
Wow.
So seeing the difference on her face and her messaging my wife and just going, I heard something for the first time ever in my life at 27 is why she does the job that she does. That's why she loves it.
Wow, that's incredible. Now please excuse my ignorance, but obviously I don't know much about people that are impaired with their hearing or deaf people as a whole. Does your son struggle to communicate effectively? How do you communicate with him?
Yeah, he has. Yeah, we it's one of the things I think when he first got his hearing aids. Like I say, he was 4 months old. We were walking out of the hospital, and he heard the leaves for the first time, and that straight away made me think, how is this going to affect his voice, right? How's it going to affect his speech and his pronunciation? There's so many different wavelengths with hearing aids and being a baby, and the way that they make them stack blocks whenever they hear a noise, and that kind of dictates whether they can hear it or not. So it's not very accurate because he's a kid. As he's getting older, it's getting more accurate. So actually the levels are changing more and he can have more frequencies in there and adjust more. But we found straight away that his speech wasn't nowhere where it needed to be. He was having help with his speech and language. That wasn't working because he didn't like talking to the people that he was dealing with because they didn't know how to deal with him. But luckily over time, they've found actually he's better at hearing lower frequencies than he is higher frequencies, which is very common in central neural loss. So what we found now is that his hearing aid's been turned up more for the higher pitch volumes. So actually he's hearing S's more. He's really struggled with S's. But as time's going on now, I sat with him yesterday for over an hour having a normal conversation with him for the first time. And it's little bits like that. And he actually stopped and said to the missus the other day, he said, "Mummy, what's that noise?" And she was looking for 5 minutes trying to find this noise, and it was the clock ticking.
That's amazing.
Heard it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Wow.
I think for me, there's that piece though around, I've got friends that are outside of mum and dad, and we look at the trees and we see them blowing and you hear the rustle. And my mum and dad, they ask that question, like, does it make a noise?
No way.
Same with you go to the sea and there's the waves. Things we take for granted, they pick up on. So it's, when you have those moments, they are kind of special. Right?
Massively special, yeah. Massively special.
Sorry, and last question for me: how can society in general help your situation? Help you feel more, and your child more included, and more important, I guess, more heard from what people can do for you?
I think especially like the school has been brilliant. So we have a little thing called a Roger. There's a little box that the teachers have around the neck, and it Bluetooths to his hearing aids. Wow. So when they're teaching and it's in a big class, busy class, he can have it directly into his hearing aid, so it's fine. If we go full on journey, we can take it for the weekend and have it in the car so he can hear us, which is great. So from a school perspective, there's nothing much really else that they can do. It's a little example over the weekend. We took him to a place where we can go snowboarding and skiing, and we took him down some slides, but he had his helmet on. And as he was coming out, the little instructor said to him, "No, mate, you're finished. You can't have another go." And he just walked off, but he couldn't hear him. So he thought he was being naughty, and he wasn't being naughty. I had to explain to him, "Sorry, mate, he's deaf. He's got his hearing aids." And he understood straight away. He was like, "Oh, I'm so sorry." It's like, no, don't be sorry. Just understand. And I think that's one of the hardest things is whenever you explain and you go, "Oh yeah, my son's deaf." They go, "Oh, I'm sorry." Don't be sorry. He's happy. He's more than happy. Like he's living his best life. He has the best time in the world. There's no need to be sorry for him. Just if he asks you and he says, "What? Pardon?" Just explain again. That's all it is. Just to be aware of it.
Misconception, right? That we're so programmed as a society to just feel for people, right? Empath. And then, you're not sorry that Chester's deaf. He doesn't have any different quality of life. And Simon, your parents, you're not sorry that they're deaf because they still have a great lifestyle and a great quality of life. So nobody else should have to feel sorry for you. Like there's not a problem there. It's just an adjustment to their lives.
Yeah.
Scott, even I've known you for years, and even now you've told me things that I actually never even knew. So it's really insightful. And Nic, you've got a lot of questions that just kind of come off the top of your head that it just helps you with your understanding as well.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I've been in and around deaf people before in my life. I find it fun, absolutely fascinating. How they communicate and could be a potentially an easy language like BSL, for example, for all of us to learn, because it sounds it looks very simple to learn sometimes. It's just the because it's just sign, but there is in-depth detail that I think people need to learn. I think it's important for people to make sure that people with hearing impairments to feel that they're included. I'd love to hear more about your story, Simon, and how it was for you growing up. I hear both your parents were deaf, so
yeah, sure.
Just
so
from that,
for me, like I said, mum and dad both deaf, and it kind of stems beyond into some of my grandparents, etc. One of the questions I get quite often is, what was it like growing up? And to me, it was normal. Like I knew no different. Mum, dad deaf. What the kind of conversation was when I got a little bit older was going to other people's houses. And when you're in school, I assumed like all of their parents were deaf because mum and dad's friends, they were both deaf as well with hearing kids.
Yep.
So I was around that a lot.
Really well.
But there was a few things that were just normal to me. Like we had no telephone in the house for a long time, which, people take for granted. It wasn't, we couldn't just pick up the phone. And that was something which, to me was just normal. No music, really. There was no radio because, again, mum and dad didn't have that. So there was things that we kind of got introduced to maybe later in life than we would have done, compared to someone with hearing parents. So I often talk about, music. People will say, "Oh, do you know such and such band?" I'm like, "I've never heard of them." Yeah. And they're like, "Oh, how have you not heard of this group?" And then because I've not had that external influence from mum and dad, that's never kind of cascaded down. So it's for me, it's been normal,
And from where I sit, like communication, obviously, is obviously a key and vital part for a lot of people. So for you, I guess you're fluent in BSL, British Sign Language.
Yeah.
And that obviously wasn't always the case. So you had to learn from a young age to communicate with your parents. So how did your parents communicate with you to start with?
So
how did you learn?
So I could actually sign before I could speak. Wow. So my first sign, and I'll show you, my first sign was this, which was light. So the reason for that was one of the adaptations we had at home was when the doorbell rang.
The light flickered.
Correct. The lights used to go on and off. So I knew that meant daddy's home. So I would be in the cot, light would go. So that would be my first sign. So mum and dad obviously introduced me to signing from a very early age. And as you said, there's different levels of BSL. There's Makaton, which they teach, to younger children. So that progressed, with mum and dad, but then there's other grandparents and other hearing people where the speech influence, came from. So it was a joined up approach. But then my decision to kind of take it further was kind of made as I was progressing through school. So I went and studied my MVQ 3 and 4 at the time in BSL with a view to then, become an interpreter. Hasn't quite panned out that way.
Life bet rarely ever does.
No, it didn't. So that's kind of like the journey, I've had external influence from, other family and childminders nursery, etc. So, but yeah, for me, signing was language. That was the first language.
Amazing.
And Scott, you mentioned that how supportive in school that they've been to help you in Chester. But Simon, I know we were discussing, I think literally a few days ago, about how that wasn't always the case for you. You didn't always have the support, and things have been quite difficult when you're helping to support your parents with certain things. Talk us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think it's things which were kind of a consistent theme as growing up was, again, we take things people take for granted. So, if mum and dad needed to phone the doctors, for example, to make an appointment, they couldn't just pick up the phone, obviously, because that facility's not there. So more often than not, that would then fall to my sister or to me to then step in to support. The challenge that we'd then have, though, was then, because I'm not my mum or my dad, obviously, I would then hit a barrier as well. They need to speak to you. And the frustration I had quite often was, well, they can't speak to you. They're deaf. I say, oh, okay. And I've had it before. They say, oh, we'll phone back later. And they're trying to, educate someone. Like, no, you misunderstand what I'm saying. They're profoundly deaf. They have no voice as such. They can't hear you. You can phone back tomorrow, and it's not going to make a difference. And there was that kind of constant challenge. And something, but quite candid more recently, the biggest challenge, it was quite emotional for me, was when my dad found out he had prostate cancer. And this kind of scenario happens quite often. So my dad got the diagnosis. We talked on video. I then went down to visit, and I accompanied him to the hospital. And the following day, I then had to sit in the room with the consultant and interpret for my dad and tell my dad that it was confirmed as prostate cancer, which I know there's other people which have been through, similar instances where they've had to tell their parents or loved ones that they've got 6 months to live. And that's something which, shouldn't happen, to anyone. It shouldn't be. And that often falls to the family to do that. So, that's one of the things which was really hard.
And that was you basically telling your dad the information,
Sure.
Which is pretty much you're the doctor at that time, at that period of time.
I can't even begin to imagine emotionally and how much that would have affected you and your mental health, and then even your relationship with your dad, to have to hear that news. I say hear, sign that news from his own son.
Yeah, it happens a lot. I think this is the challenge where, Scott may know with interpreters and having availability of, that support network. Quite often there's cancellations, or there's people that, they can't make it, or there's just no one available.
And out and about generally, how does your parents and your son Scott as well, deal with just being out and about? How do other people perceive them? Could they help in other areas? Do they feel that, are they quite ignorant to it? Do they try and help? Do they offer help? How does it work?
I would say it's probably 99% positive. My mum and dad are in their 60s now. They've obviously, life experiences, they've lived quite a lot. They travel a lot. So like at the moment, they're on a cruise over in Norway, I think it is. So they've never let that anything kind of impact on their ability to kind of live life and experience life. And they're quite candid. If they will engage with eye contact is the first thing they'll do. They'll make it quite clear that, they're deaf. And as I said, 99%, 90% of the time, people are really welcoming and opening, and it's small things that make a big difference. So it's that eye contact. One thing you'll find, again, Scott, for you, people will change the cadence of how they speak. So they'll slow down. But that makes lip reading worse, because then you've got an unnatural lip pattern, and it's all different. So I think for me, it's just a really simple one, is that, engage in eye contact, talk normally, and quite often people will cover the mouth or they may look away. So there's a few little bits, which are really simple, which can really help.
And Scott, for you, I think because it's having two people in the same business that are like parallel. So you speak about it from a terms of like, I'm the son that's looking after and that's being there for deaf parents, and you're the opposite way around. How do you feel like your experience differ but also collide at the same time?
I think we've even just from chatting, we've found a lot of similarities between the two. I think that you've had to look after your parents, right? When there's been certain situations that you've had to do. I'm lucky in a way that I would be the one there for my son to have to potentially deliver that bad news, which is the only saving grace, I suppose, in that situation, that I get to be that one who does that and help him through the tough times. So I can't imagine what it would be like the other way. And obviously I commend you massively, mate. Like, it's huge. I'm a massive believer, and I love what you said there about your mum and dad over in Norway. Like, I'm a massive believer. I've said to Chester, me and Becky have said from day one, he will not be able to use that as an excuse and not fulfill his massive potential, because he has humongous potential. He's the most musical, vocal little boy in the world, and it's the things that actually has been taken away from him that he loves the most. Yeah. And I just want him to. All I want to do is enable him to just be what he can be.
And as time goes on, he'll find Chester's way to live. Do you know what I mean? Like I have with my condition, you find your own way. So you'll get to a point. Hopefully, he'll be completely independent, and the hearing aids and all that sort of stuff, and swimming, it won't bother him because he knows what to do. That's his life, and he doesn't know anything different.
Yeah.
Simon, you've worked really closely with Brand Partnership Group previously to kind of raise more awareness, and tell us a little bit about the work that you've done and what you would like to achieve moving forward.
Previously we ran a BSL session, so British Sign Language session, led by myself, with the objective was to kind of just impart some of my knowledge of kind of basic signs, to get people to introduce themselves, ask how they are, and share some kind of tips and things around, how can you engage with someone with deafness, things you can consider doing like in an office. So for example, if you were stood by a window and there's a really bright light behind you, it casts a shadow over someone's face. Really, really has an easy adaptation to make when you're in a setting, but it's, again, as I said, small things that make those big differences. And I think for me, doing that, for one, I think it helped to empower some people that joined the sessions, because afterwards the feedback was really great. And I think the bits which got me was when someone will then say, oh, I ran into someone over the weekend and I was able to use what you taught me. And then that to me is like, if one person does it, like big ticket, I'm made up. So, it's small steps, but the impacts can be so powerful,
What do you think we can do as your colleagues and people that interact with the pair of you on nearly a day-to-day basis to become more inclusive, more aware, and also more supportive of kind of deaf people and hearing impaired people?
Do you feel like there's enough support in the workplace for you, both of you?
I think in the workplace, people are aware of it, and we're lucky we're in an environment actually that, like I say, take for instance my sister, born in the 90s. As soon as she got hearing aids, they said, well, she can hear now, that's it. There is no support now for the deaf side of her. For BSL, there was nothing. She can hear, she can go about her daily life. Luckily, the world's changed a little bit, and being inclusive and actually understanding people's disabilities is a major thing now, which it should be, quite rightly. So people being aware is the number one key, and actually we're looking in a work environment that we are aware. You've done some fantastic work, and it is that awareness piece of actually sometimes just noticing that person might have hearing aids and might have a hearing loss or other disabilities that actually we can just kind of highlight and adapt to the way that we are. It takes 2 seconds to adapt to how we are, but that could change someone's day.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think from my perspective, in the broader sense of what we can do within a work environment, you quite often see, like if I use TV as an example, so there'll be BSL-led TV programs where they'll have, in-vision sign-in, but it's not talked about and discussed a lot. And I think that's where, and certainly maybe with Chester, is having a role model, someone to look up to, someone that the people relate to. And I think it's quite an easy thing, to adapt to.
Definitely.
It might just be me, but I always see like signing on someone signing on TV, but really late at night.
Yeah.
Which I find really, that's not right in my eyes. So it's like they expect every deaf person to be awake at 2 a.m. to listen to the news.
I mean, you'll notice now even more and more artists are getting more and more interpreters for when they're performing, so that even though they can't necessarily hear the words, they can feel the vibrations, and then they can interpret the signs. And the interpreters that they get are so into it, and they bring like that passion and that vibe that people that are deaf or hearing impaired get to feel like they are still part of that community.
They do it a lot with stand-up now as well, which is great. That sort of thing. Yeah, could never enjoy that. Actually go into that now and having someone to be able to sign that. Yeah, it's being inclusive, isn't it?
And if there was any kind of, or are there any materials or any resources that you think that the listeners or even us should take a look into more?
I think basic BSL, I think, is a huge one. I know we've kind of had a bit of a chat about it before, but like there is, especially from a parent's point of view, you get told your son is deaf, they give him some hearing aids and he can hear now while he's got them in, so you're on your way. And it's tough then to get the support that you need to then understand sign, because I want him to be bilingual. I want him to understand sign, so when we are swimming or we're in a crowded room and he's finding it too much to deal with, he can just sign. Me and my wife do it. I know it sounds silly, but even when we go to McDonald's, we'll sign and say, do you want McDonald's? Because then the kids don't know what that is, so then we can surprise them and go to McDonald's. But it's little bits like that actually just having basic sign. I mean, Kally, we've been through it before when you did it for a few months, asking me questions about what signs were, and we'd figure it out together.
Yeah.
That sort of thing of just actually making it it's not a taboo subject. It's just a normal subject that we can talk about, right?
Yeah, I think there's a whole wealth of resource online. So there's, BDA, which is British Deaf Association, as an example. They'll have resources on there for, I guess, education around deaf awareness. There's some, as Scott said, basic BSL stuff on there too. So I just encourage people to be kind of curious and go away and look, because as we've touched on, the small things can really make a big difference.
Yeah. I think for me personally, I watched your BSL, and in lockdown you did a lot of stuff, and I remember tuning in, and I remember going into a supermarket the next day after you queuing to get in, and the person that was at the checkout was deaf, and even just like signing thank you, she was so overwhelmingly surprised but happy over the tiniest token of appreciation, because somebody had recognized that she was hearing impaired and had actively sought to support. So the pair of you have been so insightful to me. I'm sure they have been to you as well.
Yeah, 100%. I find it absolutely fascinating. I could ask you thousands and thousands and thousands of questions, because it's about understanding other people's disabilities, and not all disabilities are visual, and there's a lot of perception out there, just like the instructor for your son that was when he was doing snowboarding. I get the same with me when I go to a nightclub. For example, the bouncers want me to not sit down or anything like that. I want to try and sit on the nearest table or chair or whatever I can see, but they're like, can you stand up? No sitting down here, and then you explain, or sometimes even argue in my situation. But yeah, for me, it's about learning, and I think I've learned a lot, so I appreciate you guys being so open and honest, and hopefully this encourages more people to be in your position, come on the show, come on the podcast, and tell more about their story too. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. You've shared so many things that we can do to be more inclusive. You're both very, very inspiring individuals, and it's been really insightful to understand more. So talking about those in-words and things like that. Thank you for being our guests and telling us parts of your story. And listeners, thank you for joining in. You can head over to brandpartnershipgroup.com/inclusiverse to submit any questions, suggest any future episode topics, and also apply to appear as a guest. Wow, it's a lot to go through. We're on all of your favourite podcast streaming services as well. Myself and Nic will be joining for the next episode dedicated to all things neurodiversity. Scott, Simon, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.